Kirby is a pink superhero that has saved the world time and time again. He's extremely powerful and cute. But there's one skill that none of us ever thought about until this game arrived. Yes, you already looked at the title, so you know it's Kirby's Air Ride. This Kirby racing game was made for the Nintendo GameCube and was originally released in 2003 and in some other countries 2004. There were 3 modes: Air Ride, Top Ride and City Trial, each unique to one another. It ended up selling 1.6 million copies, which isn't bad considering the GameCube only sold 21 million units in its lifetime. Now, besides all the things this game has in terms of features, it also had scrapped content like levels, items and graphics. They all never made it in the game and were replaced. So let's take a look at them, shall we? First, some unused levels. Let's start with one called Dummy. This is a seemingly empty room, presumably for testing driving at odd angles, and Kirby drives upside down the bottom of a large collision plane. It does have edges, and if Kirby drives off, he will flip to his usual upright position and begin falling endlessly. They probably had to test this, since these types of physics can be a bit weird and buggy if not properly executed. And you can even glitch out of this test map, so that's already a good example. On to the next one. This one is called Test. This ice-themed racetrack features a short lap, some star-shaped marks on the ground that don't seem to function, and a small tunnel before the finish line. The game will normally crash when trying to load this track unless the enemy RAQ setting is switched to off. This is the plugin that turns on and off the enemies in the level. However, with the use of codes, this track can be played with the enemy RAQ set to on. Enemies, mostly broom hatters and scarfies, will spawn near the finish line. So clearly there's a lot wrong with this track, even though it's a test track. So that could have been the reason that they were testing this. It was short, it was buggy, and it crashed sometimes. Let's leave it at that.
Next one, Test 6. This appears to be a driving test environment laid out in the manner of the drag race levels. To the left is a large square area containing Japanese characters that represent different types of terrain like grass, water, and others. It can only be accessed by turning around at the start and driving across a piece of invisible ground. Kirby can drive off the terrain test as the entire map has collisions. A one-way wall surrounds the drag race area, making it possible for Kirby to go back to the area whenever he wants, but making it impossible for him to leave the area again. Driving off the map will eventually result in Kirby falling. After some time, the drop notice shows up for a split second and Kirby dies. There is a finish line on the north end of the track and a peg at the beginning, but it is otherwise just a featureless plank. Yet again, a bit of a weird test level. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why are there different types of terrain blocks sitting outside of the map? Well, maybe these were used to quickly change all the map's terrain and test it. Or maybe just as an example set of all the types. We also saw this in the last Kirby game we covered, Kirby 64 and the Crystal Shards, so maybe this happens more often when developing Kirby games. At first, the game was intended to be a Nintendo 64 release, but was cancelled early in its development. Both games are made by HAL Laboratory, so maybe they handle testing in such a way more often. Or this was a trend during the development for N64 games. Now, there is also another test map similar to this one, but that one appears to be for testing the flying. The map is called Test 7. There are 5 steps where the level drops down with an increasing grade. The first 2 drops aren't steep enough to cause the warp star to fly, but the latter 3 are. Besides this, the map is very similar. Now, let's take a look at some of the scrapped items and graphics. We've seen enough maps for today. A strange unused item named Usiro Yurerun, translating to waver behind, can be found in the game's top right mode. Only accessible via the debug menu, picking up the item will trigger an unusually loud sound effect, which isn't even used in the game. Besides this, it will create a large image distortion behind the player's vehicle. The exact purpose of this item is unknown, but it can be assumed that it was used to confuse your enemies in some way. So this was most likely planned to be an item similar to the blooper item in Mario Kart, which flies around for a few seconds in front of the racers, and then squirts ink all over them and their windshield. This is most likely where the idea came from, but it ended up not working out. The reason of its removal is also a mystery, but it was most likely because of its buggy nature.
On to the next one. This isn't really an item, but a feature. There's a curious alert that triggers if Kirby falls near a death plane. This can happen in cases where you can use a glitch to get beneath the game world. But the easiest way to see it is to have your machine destroyed over one of the holes in Destruction Derby 1 and have Kirby fall into the hole. While it activates near death planes, the cutscene showing Kirby falling and respawning usually plays before this alert has time to trigger. Now this one is really weird, since it's in the game and some sort of functions, but the trigger is just completely wrong. But that must have been solved during testing, right? They must have tested that feature at one point if it was intended for the game. So we think this was actually a planned thing, and because you barely notice it, they forgot to completely remove it when it was scrapped. As you can see, Kirby Air Ride was a bit weird and experimental, but what did you expect from a game that took this long to make? It was originally planned for the Nintendo 64 after all, not the GameCube. Well, luckily enough, everything ended up just fine, right? Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed this Kirby related video. If you want to watch more videos, click the annotations on the screen, or if you want to subscribe, then you can do that. Or if you feel like disliking this video and making a hate comment, go nuts!